Roger Edwards, Squid Game, the Netflix surprise hit. Or was it a surprise? Perhaps they knew exactly what they were doing. We'll discuss marketing in a moment, but you watched it. What did you make of it?
Well, it was pretty violent, wasn't it? It was pretty violent. We binged watched this over a very few nights. I think maybe three nights tops to watch all the episodes. It was just one of those series which just had everything in it: a great story, great characters, motifs, design, the music, everything. Just all of it just made it compulsive viewing, and the cliffhangers on the whole were pretty edge of seat stuff. You know, the sort of cliffhangers where you just simply cannot not watch the next episode straight away, even if it's 1 a.m. You know, you still feel, should we just stay up and watch this next episode? But that means that we won't go to bed till 2 o'clock. But we can't not see what happens. You know, it's that sort of thing. So yeah, absolutely incredible series. As I say, very, very violent. And I think that the fact that it is a South Korean production, again, makes it feel unique as well. You know, I've watched quite a few South Korean series and films recently, and the subtle cultural differences make them really interesting and so much different than an American production, which I guess we're all used to. So everything about Squid Games tick boxes for me.
I would agree. As you know, I've been very fond of Asian cinema from many, many years. Started in the 80s and 90s with Chris Ducker, with the Hong Kong superstars. And I would agree this idea of a pure escapism, being drawn into a different world altogether with their own kind of rituals and customs and so on. I find having to listen to the language spoken and having to also keep up with the subtitles just creates a truly immersive experience. And that add on to that the stunning photography that certainly this part of the world is known for. But as you hinted at, it was also the thought and the care that was taken to the production, into the design, the costumes, the symbols, the sets, and so on. We know, because of course now the story has been shared, you know, through across different media, that the director Hwang Dong-hyuk, you know, spent 10 years of his life from concept to finally getting it financed by Netflix, going through many, many rejections and so on and so forth, to the point where he has confessed to be truly exhausted by the experience. And whilst Netflix, of course, would be very keen to do a second season because it is about money after all and profit to be reinvested in other productions, he said he's not sure that he wants to do it. And I think he needs to, perhaps as a storyteller, you know, would understand that, needs to move on to something else. But what has been fascinating for all of us is that when I say it was a surprise hit, it was a surprise because there was not much pre-launch marketing. The marketing happened post-launch, you know, once the movie was out and people were talking about it. And I just think that's absolutely fascinating to observe and discuss. But the one thing that I'm taking away, it was a series, and sometimes it was difficult to watch, I would argue, because there was this crazy contrast between the games, which were childhood games, and obviously the severity in terms of people taking part as adults and pretty much killing each other.
Yeah, and the director and the writer, as you say, he's been at this for a decade trying to get this production produced. And I know that he's received quite a lot of criticism because people suggest that he's ripped off previous films like Battle Royale and The Hunger Games, for example, which are similar concepts in that you've got a group of people and you whittle them down to one winner, and usually the people who aren't the winners are killed off in the... I mean, you could even argue one of Stephen King's earliest books, in fact, I might be right in saying it was the very first book that Stephen King ever had published, albeit under a pseudonym, was called The Long Walk, which was a similar concept of 100 people taking part in a game where all of them are killed one by one until there's one left. So, you know, the idea, I don't think he's ripped off the ideas.
Not at all, no.
He's just adapted a pop cultural motif. But I think what really makes this scary is that, unlike Hunger Games, where everybody's in it to fight to the death, and Battle Royale's very similar film where they're more violent, I guess, where they're fighting to the death, and even the Stephen King one, it's all about fighting to the death. This is, as you say, it's playing incredible, simple kids' games, really simple kids' games, and yet the penalty for failing is death. And I think that the director had said that the reason that he focused in on the kids' games is he didn't want the viewers, us, to get hung up on the complexity of the game. So they didn't try and come up with some sort of Running Man, big glossy studio with all sorts of different rules and stuff like that. It was simple, easy to understand games so that we could focus on the emotions of the characters and the relationships of the characters, but also make us think, my goodness, what if I'd been in that situation? What would I do if I picked the umbrella piece of candy and had to chisel round the umbrella shape as opposed to the triangle or the square, and you're sitting there thinking, my goodness, if you get it wrong, one slip and bang, that's the end of it. That was what was really powerful for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other thing that was very striking is a choice of cinematography where normally, back to your point about maybe a US or European production, the image would be gritty, there would be a lot of camera movement, they would use camera in a way and the light conditions to amplify the anxiety. This was so well lit. I mean, it was literally, you could see everything, sometime to very, very gory detail. And I think for me, what I took away is this analogy with game shows that we are observing, whereby a handful of very wealthy individuals are enjoying seeing a large number of less fortunate individuals fighting it out. And I don't think I've shared publicly my views on game shows or programs like The Dragon's Den and many others, but I think I saw the parallel between that, which is Dragon's Den, a bunch of wealthy people embarrassing those who are less fortunate, and you could argue that the production team is guilty of maybe leaning into that. But you could say the same with the X Factor, and you got so I also saw it was a kind of mirror of society and where we are heading, and maybe a warning sign. God forbid, I don't think we'll get to that point of games that will put people at risk. But it's just playing to that thing. So and I think people saw, however, that there was ways in which you could still use dark humor to advantage. And as we're going to talk about marketing, many brands play to that as well.
Yeah, no, it was definitely a massive comment about society, this whole series. I mean, basically people who were absolutely on the borderline of financial ruin, this was almost... I mean, it's a very difficult one, isn't it? But the odds of winning, I think the exact figure will elude me, but there was about 460 of them in the game at the start. And the fact is that if there's only going to be one winner, and therefore 459 bodies, the odds of you being the winner are so minuscule that you wouldn't entertain the possibility of playing the Squid Game unless you were almost utterly on the point of desperation. And it's almost like a assisted suicide in a way, isn't it?
Absolutely.
If you're going into it in that with the odds of winning.
I'll just let you know, I'm predicting that viewers and listeners will be screaming at you that it's 456, by the way, in terms of the number of players.
I was nearly there.
Absolutely. There. So in terms of the marketing, we said there was hardly any pre-marketing on behalf from Netflix marketing team. But you could argue there was hardly any post-marketing from Netflix because essentially they could let everybody else get on with their own form of communication and PR.
Yeah, and I think it's important that we talk about the design. You've already alluded to it as well. We've got the graphics, the overalls worn by the guards, and they all have these masks, some of which had circles, some of which had triangles, some of which had squares. And those are simple motifs that people can, they can replicate that. I believe that a lot of people in Halloween this year in America and the UK have been dressing up as Squid Game characters for Halloween, and that element of self-promotion has just, has helped the show to become as successful as it is. But they've also facilitated Squid Games within cities. I've seen it in Los Angeles. It even happened in London, where they had the red light, green light statue of the girl.
God, that was the first game, wasn't it? It was the very first game that they had to play.
And they've used that in real life. So they've had people in Los Angeles playing that red light, green light game with the girl, and it's doing things like that. It's real life marketing. It's almost like role play, isn't it? Getting the public involved, and then that gets filmed by Instagram people, it gets talked about on Twitter, Facebook, etc., and it just becomes self-marketing. The studio isn't really doing a great deal of traditional marketing, but it's sowing the seeds and giving people the motifs and the design and the inspiration to effectively do the marketing for them.
The two that I remember seeing being reported in terms of being inspired by the symbols of a Squid Game, which, by the way, are very close. Well, they are the same as PlayStation, which I thought was also interesting, although nobody has a monopoly on shapes, I'd imagine. But so it was Domino's Pizza, if I'm not mistaken, when you ordered pizzas in and around the launch of Squid Game, when you opened inside the lid, there were the symbols, but the triangle was changed into a slice of pizza, and I think there was a strap line of sort. Heineken used a star symbol from one of the games, and so everybody was playing to the symbols. I think you're right around the outfits. People could obviously do some selfies with the different major cities. We did have some people knocking on the door on Halloween, so we didn't know whether families and children would be out this year because of the current health issues. But we did buy some sweets. So later on, I thought, nobody's coming. So I started eating the sweets, of course, Roger. And then we got a knock on the door. And then when I opened the door, there was two young children dressed like the guards from Squid Game with a mask. And I was thinking, and I said to them, oh, I love the Squid Game kind of reference. And I realized, you're far too young to know about Squid Game. So I don't know whether they just went along with the trend and they saw that, but I would like to think that their parents did not let them watch a Squid Game. The one that they do, it is always the case in the Netherlands, because where they get people to take part in the game, as you mentioned, we mentioned that last time, it was Mission Impossible or Skyfall, where they had to run across a train station and get to a destination on time to win the prize. And in this one, they had to play red light and green light and win prizes, including Squid Game memorabilia, and all this being filmed by bystanders on their mobile phones and so on. So what was interesting is that you and I have mentioned this idea of influencer marketing and how the term has just become hijacked to become so meaningless. But this is real influencer marketing, where brands, without any prompting whatsoever from Netflix, carry over the symbolics and the message, and then where all you have to do is put together like a pop-up display on store and let the general public take over.
Yeah, and I mean, there was the one that I liked here as well, is the pop-up store in Paris, where people could win a month of Netflix if they managed to get the shape out of the candy. The candy is called Dalgona. I don't know whether I've pronounced that right, but again, that's one of the games. Can I get that shape out of the candy? And of course, in the series, he ends up licking it, doesn't he, to make it easier to get the shape cut out. But one of the things that I came across an article which I did think was quite interesting, because as you know, Pascal, I've always been an advocate of using pop culture in your marketing. I'm famous for arguing with a very senior marketing director at a company when I said that the company I was working with at the time should have jumped on the bandwagon of a character dying in Coronation Street, because I felt that 17 million people had watched that episode and there was a message that we could have jumped onto the back of. But I do believe that because Squid Game is so particularly dark, And again, it has that comment that it's making about society and people who are struggling financially and mentally, and maybe even being driven to suicide. I do believe that there's a few brands that have just got it wrong. And yes, I think it's very important that we do use pop culture in our marketing because it's a great way to get exposure. But you've got to be so careful. And this is probably one of those ones where extra level of care is necessary to make sure that you don't cross the line.
No, absolutely. So once again, I said it was a surprise hit for the viewers, I'd imagine. I would love to have been a fly on the wall at that marketing meeting where I am absolutely convinced they said, you know what we're going to do? We're going to do very little. And in fact, the scarcity of information from Netflix is going to be what's going to encourage others to carry over the message, from brands who are going to play with the symbols to people doing some kind of Squid Game events where you can be dressed and have your picture taken, or just do enough to enable the viral marketing with some pop-up stores, also pop-up display with that doll from the red light and green light. And so crazily, for something that broke all the records within a week of being released, if you look maybe at the marketing budget, it would be quite insignificant by comparison. And maybe that's the main lesson, back to your desire for us to keep things simple, Roger. Back to understanding your audience, back to this idea of others can sometimes do a far better job than you would yourself with your marketing. These are potentially the lessons to take away from Squid Game.
Definitely. And of course, we don't know what happened in South Korea from a marketing point of view. It's difficult to research that. But I would agree with you. This is another masterclass. We do seem to get masterclasses in different forms of marketing by looking at these films, but the motifs, the design, and the fact that they were so compelling created that sort of surge of public influence, if you like, as you've described. And yeah, this goes to show what can be achieved for a very small budget when you have such strong credentials.
Wow. Well, sadly, this is the end of episode 60, Roger. Big thank you for being such a wonderful co-host and all the research you've done as well for this show. For you viewers and listeners, thank you for your support. Please leave all your comments and suggestions in the usual places. Until the next one, go out there and make sure your marketing is done right. I was Pascal Fintoni and he was Roger Edwards.